With that, want to go into probably our biggest piece, which is this location search update. And so, just to start things off the bat, we are we have been spoiled, as Daniel has said, and all of a sudden somebody was like, "Y'all got to get out your mom's basement," and that's pretty much what happened. All of a sudden, we were very barely paying rent, and yeah. Martin has been great. They've been really good, but COVID mixed with AISD and some of their hesitancy towards churches has really made our situation really bleak, honestly, at Martin. And so what we realized over the summer, while we were kind of waiting for COVID to disappear, because y'all remember, in March, we thought it'd be done by May. In May, we were like, oh, for sure by September. And now September rolls around and we're like, man, sometime by 2027, right? like we know it's going to be at some point, okay? And so as we were kind of waiting, we were kind of getting pulses from Martin that things just weren't as clean and clear as it was before. We assuredly will not be able to go back to Martin before next fall. Assuredly, that was kind of already made really clear to us. The cost to clean it and the numbers by which they would want us to meet would make us have to have currently 17 gatherings on a Sunday just to gather our people. Not because we've grown that much during COVID, but because that's how small they would want the gatherings to be. So it's impossible in that sense. And so we're not gonna be able to go to Martin. Yeah, I ain't preaching 17 times, sorry, my vocal cords ain't that good. And so that kind of left us homeless, actually. And so all of a sudden as an elder board, we were realizing, y'all, we ain't got no home. Like if COVID disappears, or if it dwindles, or if we begin to realize, it's actually safe again, like we actually don't have a home, okay? And so that takes me to the next slide, Daniel, go ahead. And want to highlight a couple of the options that we kind of have moving forward. Look, Daniel took off his headphones. There you go. Woo, thank you. I don't know if you can hear me. So we actually are looking into getting a building. And that is sort of the big update. I'm gonna let Daniel walk through all these different things, but we just were praying and kind of seeking the Lord, and we realized this is kind of the only thing that we have left. We have looked all over the place, and we have asked a bajillion people, hey, can we use your space? And either they just straight up say no, they don't want churches meeting there, or there's something wrong with the space, as Daniel will talk about in a moment. And so as we begin to kind of realize, like, what are we going to do with who we have as a church? We realize, we think we need to start looking at something more permanent, okay? And so we'll talk about how that hits on mission and stuff at the end too, but that terrified me at the beginning. But then we realized we really only have a few options, okay? One, we can keep kind of trying to meet in the school type of church for the foreseeable future. What you realize though is that there's no schools to meet in. There's no places that can actually hold us. Austin Stone's actually having the exact same problem as they got kicked out of Austin High. Now, luckily, they have 5 other campuses with buildings that they can go to, but they don't know if they're going to be able to gather at their central campus anymore. And so it's kind of like, will we be able to do that ever again? We don't know, but it's kind of that. We could switch to a house church model. And so just kind of scatter everybody and say, hey, no more kind of big gatherings, we're just house churches. That doesn't really fit in with the vision that we feel like God's given us at large, which we'll talk to more toward the future. But those are really healthy, those are really beautiful. God does really cool things in there. But the DNA in our church isn't currently set up for the flourishing of that, nor do we believe that that's actually going to reach the most people in the end based on the vision that God has given us, particularly as a church. And so didn't want to switch to house church model. We can meet Sunday nights at different churches. We met Sunday nights for the first year, and it was cool for the first year when I didn't really have any kids. And it's just difficult to do with children, and you reach a totally different demographic, honestly. So you can I talked to Stone, and I know what their Sunday evening gatherings look like. There's virtually no families. There's nothing. We want to be a diverse church, which includes generationally, and so we don't want to just kind of pivot onto evening only. Or we can buy or we can rent our own space, and that's kind of where we landed. Is like, hey, let's just look into this and see what this would mean, what this would cost, if we have the ability to do this. God's already done 7,900 crazy things that I would never imagine when I had first planted this church. What if this is number 7,901, right? And so we began to just kind of pray about that. And so I'm going to pass it off to Daniel because he has his master's in real estate. So this is a great elder to have on our board right now to kind of walk through us in this season. So you're on mute, Daniel.
There we go. Can you hear me now? All right. I'm going to go back. I'm going to use the same hand motions too. All right. I've been looking forward to having this conversation for a year, right? Several of you were involved in a team that we put together over a year ago to try to see what we could do to try to put together what it may look like to have a permanent home for our church. There's not a whole lot of things that I try to do in my life that take a year, right? If I decide to do it our whole team is motivated to get after it, there's a reason why it's a year later that we're coming back and talking to you guys. It's because it's been really hard, okay? And what I'm going to walk you through is a few things. First, I want to talk you through what exactly it is that we're searching for, right? We know we're a church. We know we're a growing church. But I want you to flip your lens a little bit here, and I want you to think about how you would think about this if you were our broker trying to find us a place that we could rent or we could buy. I want you to understand who we are as a tenant. I want you to think about where we could go, the types of buildings that we could look at, where we would want to be. And as you look at this, it starts to become readily apparent that it's a pretty tough Rubik's Cube to figure out. I've never been able to solve a Rubik's Cube in my life, but this one's tough to solve. And even still, there's a really kind of amazing opportunity that's on the table in front of us that I'm really excited that we get to share with you guys, but it's a little bit scary. Okay, so I want to walk you through first, what are we looking for, and then we'll transition into some of the other pieces. This is going to take probably 20 minutes. Just bear with me, okay? I'm going to try to not use as little real estate and business jargon as I can, but we're going to be talking about that type of stuff, so I need you to work with me here, okay? All right, so first, I want to talk about what was the target location that we were looking at as of a year ago, right? We consider ourselves an Eastside church, so where did we say we wanted to be, right? Well, Campbell, if you look at where it is in Austin, it's a little bit east, right in the middle of the east side, right? We outgrew Campbell, we moved down to Martin, which shifted us a little bit south towards the river, very much still in the east side, which is where we looked and said, hey, this is the pocket, this is where we want to be. So what did we say we wanted to do? We said we wanted to be east of I-35 or Red River. East of Red River was really code for, we really hoped somehow we would get the Sears building in Hancock Center, right? Which we tried. I'm sorry, y'all. We tried so hard. They want to convert it to office space. They didn't want to talk to us. So really it's east of I-35. We said we wanted to be south of 290, west of 183, and north of the river. So that's this pocket, this red pocket where we wanted to be. All right. Why has this been so hard? All right. Well, one, this area is booming, so it's really freaking expensive. You guys all know this that are trying to live over here, right? Other thing which is interesting, the second point on here is developers have bought up most of the big locations, and pretty much any available developable land between here and the airport has already been bought. And now that Tesla is building out by the airport, everything that was left by the airport's pretty much gone now too, okay? So what it means is there's really limited suitable inventory, which is just real estate jargon for there's just not a lot of buildings that could work for us, right? And then finally, COVID shut out the schools, which is a huge problem for multiple churches. So that kind of, like Tori said, in a way, it's kind of like we just got tossed out of our parents' basement, right? Parents lived in a nice place. They had a really sweet location. They didn't charge us very much rent. And now we kind of got to go find our own place, and it's proved pretty tough, okay? All right, so now I want to flip from the location we're looking at in terms of the area of the city. And I want you to think about the type of space we're thinking about as a building, okay? So how much space can we possibly need? We aren't that small, y'all, okay? Like I know we like to think of ourselves as this really small church. We're actually really not that small anymore, okay? To put this in perspective, our average weekly attendance before COVID was anywhere from 800 to 1,000 people. We almost doubled overnight when we went to Martin, right? So to make that work, you need a gathering, flexible space, right, that can seat about 1,000 people, right? 1,000 people need to be in one space, roughly double the size of the gym of Martin, if this is a place that we're going to be able to stay at long term. and not having like bouncers at the door saying, no, I'm sorry, you can't come hear about Jesus because we're out of space. And we don't want to do that, right? Third, and this is my favorite point, y'all keep having babies. Super fun for everybody, it really is. But you keep having babies, which means we need more space for children's ministry, which makes things also complicated, okay? And fourth, we need some office space so we can stop paying rent at Mueller, all right? So what does that translate to? We need 45,000 square feet. And I put that in perspective because most folks don't think in square feet. We're looking for 1.5 Best Buys big, right? Picture like a big old freaking Best Buy in a retail center and then add 50% on top of it. We need 1.5 Best Buys big in the middle of the city that we can afford, right? So this is not an easy thing to solve for. Okay, so we've talked about the location is tough, the building is tough. Why are churches tough, right? Okay, why are we tough to solve for? Well, number one is parking, right? We don't need parking until we need tons of it, right? So churches are really hard tenants to find enough parking for because like you don't need it 95% of the time until all of a sudden you fill everything up. That's point one. Point two, we're tough to solve for because of the space. Point three, we actually have a fairly modest budget. I think we think about like, oh my gosh, we have a budget of $1 million or going to 1.5. In the universe of what it costs to rent space, that's actually not very much, okay? And so on top of that, we feel really distinctly called to minister in the city, right? And what we're going through right now is incredibly common with churches, right? They start in the city, they grow, they get bigger, they get bigger, they start, having more needs of space and this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, what do? The best way they can make this work is they find land in the suburbs and they build something in the suburbs, and then it's back in the same place where there's not as many vibrant church families in the heart of the city. And we feel very called to be in the city. Not to become a mega church. We want to be a church planting church, but we do feel called to do that from a platform that's in the middle of the city. Okay? All right. So there's pretty much no land. So just take that out of your head at the beginning. So what are the potential building types that are available? I just kind of want to walk you through, like, what are the things that we've looked at? Well, first, we could actually buy an existing church, right? And what I'm going to do for each of these different building types is walk you through how much does it cost in rent per square foot. So how much would that be per month? And how much of our current giving would these different options represent, okay? So first, we could buy an existing church. Well, we don't even need to talk about rent because you have to find a church that's either willing to sell to us or willing to merge with us. And churches that fit that requirement, either A, they're not big enough either, right? Because we're actually fairly large. Or B, a lot of them have actually sold their churches to developers, right? Especially in the east side. And the churches are going to get knocked down and turned into other things, unfortunately, okay? So churches, we haven't been able to find an option that's viable. All right, option two, there's four types of properties: office, industrial, retail, and residential, okay? You're not going to find 45,000 square feet of residential unless you kick Michael Bell out of his house. So that option is out. So that leaves us office, it leaves us industrial, and it leaves us retail, okay? So office rents per square foot for $30 to $40 a square foot, okay? So for us, that would mean our monthly rent would be about $130,000 a month. We're paying Martin 5, 10, something like that. So we're talking like 13 times more than what we had to pay Martin. To put that in, and that's before we even pay for utilities. That represents more than our current monthly giving, right? Just to get office space. And that's before we even pay salaries or get commissions or anything, right? So the challenge is, one, it's also an office. It's really hard to find parking. Two, landlords are actually not too crazy about churches as tenants, co-sharing space with other offices, and it's super expensive, okay? So next option is retail, which is a nice idea. It's $25 to $40 a square foot. That's about $120,000 a month. That is our monthly giving. So one, there's few vacancies that are big enough, right? There are lots of retail vacancies, but a lot of them are being redeveloped into other things, right? Two, parking's super problematic, especially depending on the other tenants, because a lot of them want other people there on Sunday mornings. Three, it's expensive to rent. No one's going to let you buy because they want to retain ownership of the whole shopping center. They usually don't want to sell just a piece. And then finally, landlords want percentage rents, which means they take a cut of your sales of whatever happens in your store. That's how they make a lot of their money in retail, okay? And the last option is industrial, which is a lot cheaper, right? That would be about $65,000 a month, or about half of our current giving. Challenge with that is parking's awful, okay? Usually, like, you'll have a gigantic warehouse and like 10 people work there with a bunch of robots. So there's really not a whole lot of places for people to park. Also, the locations are usually way away from population centers because not a whole lot of people want gigantic industrial properties in the middle of the city, and they need access to highways and railways, so it's bad locations. And also, it's really expensive to repurpose them into churches. Like we looked at one near the Mueller HEB. It was too small, but the cost to just install fire suppression systems was really, really expensive because if you catch fire, you're not too worried. You're less worried about it if you're using it to store boxes. You're a lot more nervous if it's full of people, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about where are we right now, because we're leading to the opportunity that's ahead. I just want to make sure you have the context. Like I said, we think about ourselves as an East Side church, but I want you to think about where all of the, where we live and where kind of the middle of the nexus of the church is. You guys have probably seen this on our website before. Each of the red dots represents a different community group, right? And man, are there more than when Marina and I joined the family a few years back. It's pretty amazing to see. Okay, so if you put where we were before, this is Martin in the middle of the map, right? What I want to do is just zoom into just the middle of the city, right where the middle of all of those community groups are, okay? And zoom this out. All right, if you want to focus on where this is, if you think about, we are actually less East Side in some ways than you might expect, right? If you were to draw a point that's the middle of where kind of all of the different community groups are, it's right by the old Highland Mall, actually. For those of you that, like me, are old enough to have been in Austin when there used to be both malls and one off of Airport Boulevard, the old Highland Mall. What's really amazing is there is an opportunity that has popped up that is really amazing that God is, I think we believe God is providing, that is literally a part of the old Highland Mall where we can possibly buy space. And it's literally right in the middle of where we actually really are, okay? Okay, so let me talk a little bit about where this place is. It's called Highland Tech Center. It's an old Sears, right? It used to be a Sears. It's like if you take the train, you're going north on the train from downtown, and you stop at Highland Park Station. You could walk right across the street. There's like a Jack in the Box and a Wells Fargo and a building right behind it. That used to be a Sears, right? Some of the best big office, best properties in every city in America are Sears because Sears is running out of business, right? So we don't have a shot at the Hancock's old Sears, but we do have a shot at the old Highland Mall Sears. So, you know, circle of life. This video is actually from the materials from the owner of the place, showing north looking south downtown, right? So like I said, the railway pulls up literally right across the street, and then this is Airport Boulevard. Hopefully you guys can see my cursor going across the screen. And right behind it is this old Sears building, right? If you look locationally where it is, it's literally dead center between I-35 and Mopac, and it's just above 290 and right below 183. It's in that kind of north central pocket. It's still close to UT. It's right in the middle of where all the community groups are. And it's also right in the middle of that entire redevelopment of the Highland Mall, okay? So let's talk a little bit more about this spot. Everybody take 1 minute and just read this paragraph. This is from the marketing materials from the landlord, and I want you to read how they describe the site to prospective tenants and buyers. Okay, so why did I want you all to read this? You'll notice that the owner is marketing this as office property, right? So if they're wanting to market it as office property, why are they willing to talk to us? Well, both we and the owner think that the Lord is working through this, given the COVID situation, to make something potentially really amazing happen at the building. And what I would say is that the owners are believers. They own the whole property. They intend to sit on the property and own it for a very long time. And if that wasn't the case, I don't think that this whole situation could come together, okay? So again, if they're marketing it to office, why are they willing to sell? They're believers, and this is a really bad time to be bringing office property onto the market. For anybody who works from home, they can all attest to that, okay? All right, so we talked about, I want to talk a little bit more about the building. So if you look at the pictures on the right, these are some shots from the outside of the building. The one on the bottom right, that's a view of the inside of the building right now. For those of you that are in real estate or know enough about it, what that essentially is an empty shell. They've gutted the whole inside of the building, and they're waiting on a tenant to take the building so they know how to build out the inside of the shell, okay? They call those tenant improvements, right? It literally just finished complete rehab and construction on the outside in August. Like I walked in there one day when it was still under construction and just started talking to the construction manager. And he's like, oh yeah, this thing's done and ready for us to start outfitting in like a month. We just don't have anybody to put in it yet. There's literally no situation that we know of that you can find where literally it's like a blank canvas just waiting for somebody to move in. Which is pretty amazing that this is happening, okay? So here's a site plan of what it's going to look like probably about a year from now, all right? So right here on the square where it says Highland Tech Center, that's the old Sears. Right now, everything around it is just a big parking lot, okay? They sold off everything on the lot except the building, and it's going to be developed into, probably 4 or 5 story apartments around it. A lot like those apartments you find at Mueller where like Maya and Clement live. It'll look a lot like that when it's all done, with a parking garage over in the corner, and we'll have access to like half of it, right? What they're willing to do is essentially sell the top half of the building to us and carve it up into a condo so that we can buy half the building. So one, they're willing to retain ownership of half, let us buy half because A, it's all we need, and B, it's probably all that we can afford, while still working with us long term, because by having us in the building, it enables them to lease out the other half of the building to some charities that the family is involved with, that they would like, that they can co-locate with the church, but they wouldn't be able to co-locate with an office tenant, right? Which I think all of us will get excited when we hear who we would be sitting with, okay? All right. I just started getting feedback. Weird. Okay. All right. So that's what the site will be. All right. So let me walk you through piece by piece what it's going to look like. I just ran over my dog. Sorry. All right. So this right here is the old Sears building, right? This is the Jack in the Box and the Wells Fargo, and this is coming along Airport Boulevard. I want you to kind of get a picture of like what the site is and how we would be using it, right? First across the street is the Highland train stop, right? People could literally get off the train and walk over there, right? And just north of this is the main entrance to ACC's Highland campus, right? And if any of you have been in this part of the city, they're redeveloping everything around here, so we would be right in the middle of it, okay? The parking garage would go in the northwest corner, right? And we would be able to access the garage, and then they're going to carve off the other parts of the parking lot into these apartments, right? We would be taking the north half of the building, and then the 2 other tenants that would be located with us, one is a school for autistic kids called ACE, the ACE school. The owner is on the board there, I believe, and they would be putting in a playground over on this side that they would let us use for a kids' church on weekends, which as a parent, I'm super excited about. And then the other part of the building would go to actually like a Catholic version of Planned Parenthood, where it's like a pregnancy center for women that just doesn't offer abortion, which we obviously can get very excited about as well. So these are 2 different people that we would be able to work very, very well with. We can have ministry involved with them, and they can go to the site because we can take half the building, and now all of a sudden it works, and the family's really excited about this as believers, right? We can lease parking across the street from this office building. They've offered to lease us all the parking we need fairly cheap. And then, yeah, so this is what it would look like. You kind of have to picture what it's going to look like a year from now. And I'll talk about this at the end. Next weekend, we're going to do kind of a Jericho thing around the building for anybody that wants to join me and do a prayer walk around the building so you can see it and pray for it and see it in person, okay? Okay, so I want to talk to how can we use the space to partner with others, okay? Like I said, we're not out trying to become a mega church here. And honestly, we can't afford to build this gigantic auditorium with big fancy screens, and we don't have the money for that, y'all, first of all. Second of all, there's other ways that we can use this that we think can really be a benefit to the community and also to the church family. One, Tori talked about the fact that DTS wants to have kind of their campus in partnership with us, which means we can create a space that would facilitate them being able to have classes and stuff like that right in the middle of the city, which would be great to partner with DTS. On top of that, the gathering space, we want to create it as like a flex space. Like we already bought a portable stage. We got no problem rolling out chairs, right? Like we don't like having to do all this tons of setup, but like we'd love to be able to have other churches be able to use the space at different times, set it up as co-working space. Or we've actually had folks that heard like a year ago that we were in the market trying to find space. And I actually had a couple, like a fine arts program reach out to me that was like a ballet and an orchestra saying, hey, is there any chance that you could create this as a flexible space? Because churches aren't the only people that can't afford to be in Austin anymore. And we need a space where we would love to have performances, right? Or you can set it up to where if you make it fancy enough, maybe you can do receptions there. I don't know. We've got Dara and Matt and all kinds of architects and brilliant gifted designers that are a part of our church family that can help us figure out how to make this work. But I wanted to reassure everyone that we're not trying to create a megachurch campus. We're trying to do something flexible that can bring glory to the Lord and be a good steward of the money that it would take to do this. Okay? All right. So let's talk a little bit about where this is located, right? So the Star is where Highland Tech Center is in the city, and these are several different zip codes that are all around it. There is a lot of diversity, ethnic diversity and socioeconomic diversity all around where this is, right? So if you look at just by zip code, right? If you look at like 78752, which is where the building is located, 45% of households in that zip code make less than $30,000 a year, right? Now compare that to maybe 78757, which is Shoal Creek, right? Where very few people, comparatively speaking, make less than $30,000 a year, right? So you have a decent amount of ethnic diversity. It's Austin, so it's still, it's not perfect, but it's good. And I think this still speaks to the fact that we want to be urban. We want to be in the city because we don't want our church to have everybody look the same. We don't want everybody in the church to have the same socioeconomic background. We believe that our family is enriched and we come to know the Lord in a more fulsome way by having diversity. And even when it's hard, we want to keep making investments that make that continue to be a requirement for our church family. And we believe that this location can really help do that. Okay. All right. Next, how does the site fit our mission? Like I said, it's in the middle of the city, it's close to UT, it's good diversity. It's big enough to accommodate growth, but it also kind of forces our focus to remain on community groups. The space is not big enough for us to end up a megachurch campus in the middle of the city, and that's not what we want. We want to be big enough to be like a factory of church plants, launching plants all over the city and all over the country, and we think the space can help that. It gives us enough space to get to the right size for that type of scale and budget, but not a ton bigger than that. And finally, and this is no small point given where we are now, it allows us to no longer be beholden to Austin Independent School District, to have space to gather and have permission to gather. I, for one, am tired of having to ask permission from Austin Independent School District to be able to gather, okay? All right, so now I want you guys to think about numbers. We talked about real estate. Now I need you guys to work with me for a few minutes and let's talk about numbers, okay? The owner has offered us 3 different structures to help us get into this building. They originally offered to let us rent the space, and I'm going to be really honest, we just couldn't afford it, right? The rents are expensive, the step-ups and rents are expensive, and so we went to them and said, hey, would you consider letting us buy it? And their response was, well, we intend to continue owning the other half of the building. We'd like to put in other people that would pair well with you. So yeah, actually, we're willing to spend the money to carve up the building into essentially like a condo regime so that we can have you in the building. But also, if you think about it from the landlord's perspective, if something goes wrong and we're not able to pay for it and we kind of get tossed out of the building, which we have no intention of doing, they own the other half of the building and it lets them get their whole building back, right? So this actually works well for the landlord in a way if we buy it. And so what they've offered is they've actually offered to finance it for us as well. And the terms that they've offered, in my professional opinion, are better in some ways, in most ways, than what we would be able to get from a bank. So the price that they're offering, I would say, is fair. The structure that they're offering is unreal, okay? So what they basically said is, we're going to do everything we can to be flexible to help you guys be able to get into this space, but we're not going to give it to you for free because we can't afford to do that, and we're not going to take it that far. So they've offered us 3 different structures, okay? We as an elder team have not picked one of these. I want to be really clear about what we have decided and what we haven't. We've decided that we wanted to come to you as a church family to talk about why we would like to pursue this. We need to take a vote as a church family before we can buy a building. This is not something that those of us in the elder board can take as a decision without the church. That goes against our bylaws, right? So this is not the last time and the only time that we're going to be talking about this. But they've offered us 3 structures that we can consider. One is they've said you can buy it for $10 million, but ownership reverts back to them after 30 years, right? So it's like a reversion option. Well, why would they do that? Because essentially it looks like a lease to them, right? They've given it to us for 30 years. They get it back after 30 years, but it's great for us because the rents don't go way up, and because we own it, we don't have to pay property taxes because we're a nonprofit. If we rented it, they're the owner, they have to pay property taxes, so we would too. That one thing alone saves us like $15,000 a month, which is over 10% of our whole budget, okay? So they're really working with us. So 10 million if it reverts after 30 years. They've offered it for 12.7 if it reverts after 50, or they've offered it for 15 and we just own it outright, okay? Now, before everybody panics, we do not have to come up with $10 million. The whole point of this is they are financing it for us. We have to come up with the monthly payment, just like you would in a house, but we are going to have to come up with the money to do the construction, okay? So essentially, we got to come up with two things. We have to come up with the increase in giving to cover paying rent after getting thrown out of the parents' basement. That's part one. Part two is we have to come up with enough money up front to actually do the construction to fill out the building, okay? So I want to talk you through real quick, just how do you think about comparing these options? Because they're actually very different, okay? All right, I'm a nerd. I had to include a graph. Don't judge me. All right, graph on the right is just plotting how do these options play out over the first 10 years, okay? Because the way that this works out is some of these are way easier up front, but become much more painful by comparison over time. So I need to show you the first 10 years, and then I need to show you what happens at year 30 for you to kind of understand the differences. All right, so the blue line, each of these lines plots the total amount of cash that we're going to be spending, both in construction costs, monthly payments, everything else. Think of it as like the total accumulating money that we've spent going out the door. The solid blue line is what if we just bought it for $15 million. So you can tell at the very beginning, this is year zero. For all of you finance nerds, that means now. So year zero is now. We're going to have to spend a lot more money up front, right? Because it's going to cost more because we'd have to have a bigger down payment, essentially. And it looks like it's way more cash out the door. And in the beginning of the period, that is true. These other two lines are how much cash we would spend in either the 30-year or the 50-year reversion option. So it's way easier to get into this building at the beginning if we do the reversion thing. If we think in the long term, however, though, the thing is what happens after in the future, right? If you bought it outright, once you hit year 20, you've paid it off. This isn't like a house mortgage where you can get a 30-year loan. In commercial properties, you can get like 20 at the most, okay? So after 20 years, we would own it, and then we're not paying anything, right? It goes to zero. And both of the other options, we keep paying, and in the 30-year option, all of a sudden we got to buy another building and then start it all over again, right? So the choice that's in front of us is all about what type of provision, like what is the Lord going to do, right? Like what are we going to be able to do as a church family to support this? How is the Lord going to bring forward folks to help us come up with capital up front? We on the elder team, obviously, we would much rather just own it outright and not have to mess with all of this, even though it's more painful at the beginning, because in the long run, we think that's the best way of stewarding the resources of the church. But we're not naive about the fact that this is a lot of money to be able to come up with, and we're not sure how it's going to play out just yet, okay? All right, so 3 options. What's the financial need to make it happen? So I walked Marina through this, and by the time I got to this slide, her eyes were like, nervous, and she was like, this sounds crazy. But I want to reassure you that it's not that crazy, okay? So if you look in the top right, our average monthly giving is between $100,000 and $120,000 a month. Our average monthly gift per giver is only $121 a month, okay? So folks in the covenant community, their average gift is bigger than this, right? Like I said, 40% of the people give 70% of the gifts, but just in general, across the board, of people that give, and a lot of people don't give anything, the average gift is relatively small, right? So what would need to be true in order to be able to afford this? It's the Sandby check that I want you guys to think about, right? And this first one, we would need to raise $3.6 million for construction. We're buying the shell, but we still have to outfit the shell, right? And we need to pray that this would come from people watching the guided gathering in Boston. I mean, like, we're not just thinking about this coming from us. Like, we believe and hope and pray that this is going to come from all over the place like manna, right? To be able to cover the monthly cost increase, right, we need either a 32% increase in the number of givers at $121 each, or we need to increase from $121 average to $165 on average, right? So when you think about the change that's necessary here, it's not as dramatic as you would think, right? The same thing on the 50-year option, right? It's the same increase. If you buy it outright, which is what fee simple means, You just need more upfront for construction and potentially a down payment depending on how we structure that one. I don't know whether or not we'd have to go through a bank or through the seller yet. We still got to figure that out. Okay. And even in that one, you're going from $120 to $200 a month. It's doable is my point. Okay. I don't want you guys to get intimidated by this. This is doable, though it is frightening. Okay. All right. So my last slide, next steps. Okay. Prayer, fasting, wisdom. I shouldn't put et cetera because neither prayer nor fasting nor wisdom are throwaways. They're all actually kind of hard. All right, first, we need prayer and fasting from the entire church family, and I mean that. This is a really, really, really big decision, and it's one that all of you are going to have to take a vote on, and I want you guys to be prayed up when you take that decision, okay? And I'm being serious about this. Second, we're going to be reaching out to a firm that actually helps churches raise money for this type of stuff. Tori, Casey, me, Jacob, we're not professional fundraisers. We've talked to some friends of ours in the church that are, but we need help, right? Like this is not an easy thing to do. We're going to have a capital campaign that seeks generosity both from within our family and from other believers outside the well, right? So we want you all to be aware that that's going to be happening. Number 3 is we're going to have a lot of deal structuring and negotiation with the seller to figure out how to put this together. And Paul and I are going to continue to be going through a lot of that and trying to lead that as best we can. Fourth, I'm going to be leading a prayer walk around the building Saturday next week. Our old church in Cincinnati had something like this happen and literally did the Jericho thing around the building before they went to New York to bid on a building that was up at auction. They prayed that it would just work out, and like 3 different people's planes got delayed that were going to be bidding against them, and they were like the only one there to bid on the site. Like I want all of us to have an opportunity to see their faith intersect with finances, right? And see how God works through those things, because I think we hold that really tightly and it impairs our growth. So I'm really excited about this. Anybody that wants to meet me, we're going to be there at 10 a.m. We'll send out an email afterwards with the address so everybody can be there, and just bring a prayer buddy, and we're going to do some marching, just no trumpets because I think that would be a little weird in the middle of the city. And then number 5, we're hoping, pray for this, we really would love to have like a praise and worship night at the parking lot, like actually at the site. We think that'd be pretty cool. I think the landlord would probably be willing to do it too, because like I said, they're believers as well. Okay. So Tori, I'm going to hand it back to you. Do you want to speak to like the Q&A portion? If folks have questions, how to send those in, maybe we can talk about them at the end. And I'm done. And then I'm going to stop sharing and pass the ball back to you, Tori.